All right.
Yay.
We are going live, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to say an official welcome, but I'm doing this thing where you have to click go live separately on Instagram. Now we're live on Instagram. Cool. Okay. I'm so excited to introduce you, Sadaf, because I don't know. You said that you and I said this when we talked, that I said, I just feel drawn to you
Yes.
and the way that your mind works and thinks about therapy. And then I confirmed my made up story about you when we actually spoke.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to have you here because you're a therapist in India, and I love learning about how mental health is seen and handled in other cultures.
Yes.
And I suspect that you might be unique within your own culture too. So would you be willing to just introduce yourself and frame
Sure.
up your
Mm.
work in the
Yeah.
world?
Yeah. That's good. So I am the founder of a small practice that works out of Bombay. It's called 𝗛𝗘𝗿𝗀, and I think in deciding the name itself, it kind of gives a hint as to the kind of work we do. So usually when you see the names of other practices, it's about the mind, or like a clinical word for the mind, or maybe like a philosophical word for the mind. But what Guftagu means is it's an intimate conversation between friends, usually, or lovers, and there is a casualness to it. And the casualness is what sort of brings the intimacy. And it felt like in India, largely right now, you might see a clinical discourse where awareness is being done from a framework of telling people what depression is, what anxiety is, what is OCD, what is borderline disorder, so on and so forth. So you might see like a clinical trend in the work, and the other trend which is now picking up as maybe in response to how clinical it's been is the social justice framework of mental health. But that discourse you might largely see sort of online, or maybe in liberally or associated universities, perhaps. But you don't see the interaction with the unique person in front of you still. So you don't see the middle. You see a clinical lens or you see a social justice lens, but you don't see a person to person lens. So that's what we were trying to bring, and I think that's what before starting Guftagu, when I was doing various jobs. So I'd worked in an online counseling platform, and I'd worked in a family court field action project, and also a school. So these settings gave me a glimpse of what it is like in each of these spaces and what lens is more prevalent. But I felt like this meeting the person bit was missing. And that is, I think, what we tried starting to fill out, that, okay, let's make it relational, relatable, nuanced, but also lighter. So a lot of our efforts at the discourse level are also, we'll take a lot of, parts of Bollywood songs, or we'll take some memes that are going around right now and try to relate it to a mental health context. So we don't want this to be something that's very heavy, because when the work in awareness is from a clinical lens, people feel like, oh, this is something to be careful of, something that you don't want to get into. And you might go to the doctor as a last resort. But making it approachable means that this is a conversation everybody can have, even if you're not diagnosed with anything. But it just help you have clarity about your own life and choices. So that's largely me and the work that I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Very interesting. I love how you kind of frame up this diagnostic model versus the social justice model versus
Yeah.
the person to person model.
Yeah.
And and yet you're a queer affirming therapist, and that's something that you lead with.
Yeah.
So how does that jive with what you just said about, like,
Hmm.
how does the social justice framework influence your work? Where do you
Yeah.
see that it has holes or maybe doesn't quite meet the whole person?
I think in some ways, both the diagnostic model and the social justice model eventually try to flatten the person, right? I
Uh-huh.
think they both started out trying to be helpful, but because they have to kind of categorize broad issues or broad categories of people under a certain name, eventually what ended up probably happening was it flattened people a little bit into just the identity. Like maybe if previously if it was just the disorder, now it may have become just the identity. So as if you're seeing a queer person, they may not have issues of anger, or they may not have issues of childhood trauma, or all of that. Like, oh, this is just a queer person, so they just have queer issues. That's not the case, right? Like, people are layered and complex. So I think those are the holes that I find in both the frameworks, and then there are bits you can pick up from both. It's useful to know the nature of defenses, right? So it's useful to know the systemic marginalization that a queer person goes through that maybe a heterosexual person wouldn't go through. But it's also useful to know, okay, despite that, it's not that everything that the queer person does is justified just because they are marginalized. There may be a nature of defenses where they have a more attacking tendency. They may be verbally abusive to people around them. So you still need the clinical bit to come in with the social justice bit in order to meet the real complex person in front of you. So that's how I think it fits together. And I think the power threat meaning framework that we'd spoken about in the previous call, I think that's where that also comes in, because that framework is a very useful one to think of both the clinical information and the social justice information, in just the sense that, okay, this is the lay of the land. So it will talk about how somebody might even be using violence to regulate or dissociate or numb from a situation, or using violence to save themselves from a situation. So it doesn't pass a value judgment on whether something is right or wrong, but how certain power misuses by someone could create a feeling of threat in someone else, and that threat is made meaning of in a certain way. And because that meaning is made, we might be using particular coping. And so if you can work with meaning, eventually the threat can be reframed, and power can be used in a different way, not just in a coercive way. So it's a very useful way to just see these as facts, or how people are, without calling it bad. Because I think one of the things which happens with social justice is that there are subtle ideas of, oh, this is somebody we don't work with. Like, for example, if it's somebody who may have perpetrated violence, then we don't work with them. But then if we are looking at a feminist future, if we don't work with people who might be perpetrating, aren't we saying that we'll wait for people to be victimized and then work with the victims? Right? So if we don't work with the perpetrating population, then this utopia is going to be further and further away.
So for those of you that aren't watching and will listen to this podcast later, I'm speechless right now. And I kind of want to just fly to your house right now and sit at your feet and listen to you all day long. That's my reaction to everything you just said. And I want to slow you down because there was so much juicy stuff that you just said.
Yeah.
First of all, this power threat meaning framework. I mean, I take this similar lens. I often think misuse of power is trying to do something for the person, not that they are an oppressor, but they're behaving oppressively as a psychological defense against something. And they're still responsible for the impact that has and the way that it creates a threat in another person's life. And that the systems set people up with more ways to get away with acting that way, certainly. I want to know, this power threat meaning framework, is it your own or is it from something else?
This is Lucy Johnston and their colleague, I forget the name, but British Psychiatric Society or Psychological Society, one of those had published it. And I think it's still on their website. So I think it's endorsed by the sort of main body over there, BPS. And I think it was done after rigorous research with a lot of people who had used mental health services, basically NHS users. They were studied at length to try to understand things beyond the existing frameworks, and that's how I think they came up with this. But it's a freely available document, and I think that they do free trainings throughout the year as well to get people to understand how to use it.
Interesting. We're going to actually have a panel discussion on Monday about power and interpersonal connection. Now I'm like, oh, I wish Sadaf could be a part of that. So what's the antidote? Like, what I heard you say is, look, you have to get two people talking about meaning, or you have to understand the meaning making happening inside of an individual and not flatten them based on their identity in the social structures, but really say you as an individual are a meaning making animal. Help me understand the alternative solution to just the diagnostic framework and the social justice framework that power threat meaning framework might bring.
I think the solution from within the framework, if we are talking about just like strictly following the document, is I think to help people investigate the meaning they're making. But what I feel works in day-to-day conversations when I have with people, I think it goes back to what Viktor Frankl said about the choice, the place between stimulus and response. Because it feels like, and that's my personal experience too, that we've, in times of trauma and distress, I think we make automatic meanings, based on what was available to us, maybe intergenerationally or just whatever made sense in the moment. And one of the things that maybe a lot of classical analysts get wrong is that maybe you're repeating this out of some pleasure you're getting. But my personal experience has been that we repeat because we don't know anything else. It's probably automatic. And so getting that automatic to be looked at, because we may cling to it because of familiarity, that when the analyst or the therapist says that let's look at why you do this, a part of me can feel protective about it because it saved me, or it feels like a part of me at an identity level, it's stitched into me to cope like this. So it can feel a little like, why are you taking this away from me? But if we can create that relational safety and trust, and for them to not feel like the analyst is opposed or the therapist is opposed and taking away something, but let's look, both of us look at it together, like, when children play and they curiously explore the room together. If we can create that kind of relationship, we can look at it together, and then from the automatic space they can have a more conscious choice they can make about, oh, this is my existing meaning, but it harms me or it harms someone else, or it just doesn't suit my life anymore, like my life has changed, I'm safer now, etc. So maybe I can look at it in a different way and make different choices. And there's a very nice, I think it's a folk tale, but I'm not sure if it's from these parts. But there was this one time when I was asking a lot of questions at home about why do we do it like this, or when my mom was saying that I should wear the hijab and so on and so forth. And she was like, why do you ask so many questions? Like, I've never asked these questions to my own mother. So I'd heard the story which I told her, that there was a woman who used to cook the fish at her house with both the tail and the head cut off, just the middle portion. And her husband would ask her that, why do you do this? The head is tasty. Why can't we have that too? And she said, I don't know. Like, my mom used to do it this way. So he said, let's call her up, and or let's meet her or something and ask her why she does it like that. And the mother said, oh, I used to do that because my pan was small, it couldn't fit the whole fish.
Oh
But if
my
you have
God.
a big pan, why don't you cook the whole thing, right? So when I told this to my mother, I think it's stuck with her. Like, she will still like kind of re-say it or replay it to people now, that, oh, we should ask questions of our elders. It's not necessarily disrespectful, it's just that they were working with a different life, and we may be working with a different life. Because in India, it's also very codified that if you question your elders, you're being disrespectful to them. So this lens helped her to question what she might have picked up from her mother without it having the layer of it's disrespectful to question. So I think we can we can bring in maybe like folk stuff like this or things like that to help people question the automaticity. But I think outside of a relational safety, if we attempt that, then it can feel like an attack, which is why when therapy goes too fast or any sort of change endeavor sort of casts people as, some in some reduced ways, like maybe stupid or unenlightened or something like that. That's often why I think maybe it doesn't work in the long term, because there isn't enough relational safety. They don't feel seen as an equal, and then the investigation happening, it's like a one above sort of a thing. Yeah.
I'm smiling. Okay. I knew my intuition was right that I Okay. So let's see. Traci, calm down. Just reflect back what Sadaf is saying. I know you're really excited. Okay. So, first of all, I, what I hear you saying is that, well, okay, I'm going to first say how you're talking. You're saying really provocative, radical things in this very nonchalant, no big deal kind of way. There's a
Yeah.
not, in a way, you're modeling what you're talking about in the room with the client. What you're saying is, I'm not going to be impositional with how I'm saying this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to move into an authoritarian position in sharing with you my ideas. I'm sharing with you, like, your tone of the way that you're saying is, I feel invited to think with you. And in a way, what I hear you saying is what you do in the room with a client is, look, I'm not going to impose clinical theory on my clients. And I'm not going to take them to these really scary, deep places. I'm going to keep it in a way that's relationally attuned to them. I'm going to use memes.
Yeah.
I'm going to use folklore.
Mm.
I'm going to use stories. And I'm also going to not impose this kind of shame-inducing change that says you're stupid or amoral if you don't change quickly enough or in these ways, which I think both the diagnostic and the social justice frameworks are guilty of doing right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to meet you as a human, and we're going to talk as equals.
Yes.
And you're doing that with me right now. Like, you're doing it in just the way that you're presenting the information. I'm tracking it. That's why I'm so freaking excited right now. I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the best way. I mean, I think it wasn't a conscious choice. I think it just became so over the years. But I feel like I guess it's the way I would like to be spoken to. So, it's like lead with what you would like to see in the world, that sort of thing. Yeah.
me too. And when
Yeah.
therapists start using, like, even when I'm on Instagram and therapists are like so into all, proving how smart they are with all their diagnostic words. And I'm like, to me, when you can make a complex thing understandable without
Yeah.
using any diagnostic language,
Mm.
then I think you're a good therapist. When you have to
Yeah.
use too many of these words, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's these words, especially if they become part of the popular vocabulary, like now trauma is that word, right? Or
Sure,
I,
sure.
I don't know, PTSD or like whatever. Like these words sometimes then seem to become like placeholders. Like we don't know what they mean anymore. And it's like, you kept the placeholder in your place and you're gone, and it's the word that's supposed to do the speaking for you. It feels like a checking out a little bit. Yeah.
Well said. Couples often come in and they start the session with, "We want better communication skills." I said, well, what is good communication to you?
Yeah.
They're like, aren't you supposed to tell me that? I'm like, Am I? Am I
Yeah.
supposed to tell you that? Aryan's watching. Hi, Aryan, and they're all over. They love you as much as apparently I love you too. But Aryan, you could have come on the show too with us. You said feminist vision.
Yeah.
Please say more. What did you mean by that? Because we can politicize this, and use that word as a placeholder, and everybody will get their panties in a bunch about it. But I want to know what you actually meant when you said that.
I think for me, it felt like the point of feminism before. I think this also got very rigid. Like I'm not super good at how the history went, but it seems like there was a time when it was speaking to injustice, and then their rigidities kind of creeped in. So it seems like human nature to do that to movements. But it felt like it was about trying to create a fluidity of experience for people, that, oh, don't slot me as XYZ because I'm, say, born female, and don't tell me that I can only do this work and not that work, and don't take away my rights because I am born so it was about introducing the fluidity of human experience into how maybe laws were being made or people were being seen. Except that I think it felt like over time the meanings got rigid anyway, but like with different identities, perhaps it was then white women thinking of black women as lesser beings, or in India like the upper caste women thinking of lower caste women not belonging in the feminist movement, or cis women doing the same to trans women or men, and so on and so forth. Like um, I hear a lot of information from clients who are on dating apps. And it's always interesting what the men are going through, because it seems like they are going through being reduced also, like being seen as either just people who will who will be ATMs for money, or who will be ATMs for sex. And that's a reduction in itself. But right now there is a way that is being spun as the whole boss girl narrative. So I'm this boss babe and I ask for everything I want. But then you're also reducing the person, right? Like he has feelings too, he can say no, right? All of that is there. So it's how something that was supposed to be liberating has ended up, maybe reducing the other gender, whoever that may be. So for me, the vision is where we can hold everyone in complexity and fluidity and not feel like we have to have these rigid, ways of looking at people, because it's a very split way that men are looked at right now, like as this support caregiver sort of thing, but also toxic, and it's like there's nothing in between. And a lot of men anyway suffer from loneliness because they're supposed to be culturally not using mental health services, not being weak or vulnerable, so on and so forth. So anyway, they're pushed towards loneliness, and I think a lot of them crave intimacy only in the dating space then. And now when this is happening, it seems like that one avenue is also going where they could get some warmth. So we are punishing now, we're punishing a lot of men, and of course we're punishing women and so on. So it feels like something which would allow for the fluidity and complexity of people to exist.
So there are three words that just stood out for me as I was listening to you. Reduced,
Mm.
rigidity, and punishment.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, it seems to me like that's what you stand for, is a therapeutic model that doesn't reduce people,
Yeah.
that doesn't become rigid or encourage clients to become rigid,
Yeah.
and that doesn't punish.
Mm. Yeah.
Did I hear that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And the connection that I'm making, that I'm getting so excited about, I'm sorry, I'm having a huge crush on you right now.
Oh. We'll make you feel again.
I'm not. Elle said this yesterday. Elle said this the other day. Oh, you're just making me feel good. I'm like, no, go back and listen to all the episodes. I don't do this with everyone. I do have crushes on people, but look, I really am in agreement with you. I'm going to be canceled for saying this, but I do think that the diagnostic model and the social justice model right now are reducing people. They're overly rigid and they're punishing,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm not stoked about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I think you told me once, I think in our first conversation, that being raised in an orthodox environment, we have like this sixth sense about when anything is becoming orthodox, even when the supposedly freedom oriented movements are also picking up the orthodoxy, right? So I think maybe that's what is there in both these spaces, that they are becoming crystallized orthodox. There's a very clear idea of what's right, what's not right. And maybe that's not what they set out to do initially, and it's sad that it's become like that.
in a way, let's talk about the queer community.
Yeah.
Because outside of when, like sometimes in the activism, like you'd said, any oppressed group can become very rigid. But so I'm going to share a story with you about my experience. I had this experience in Bratislava, Slovakia last year. I was listening on the sidewalk there. I went to an event. The event that I was there for, I wasn't into. So I'm like, well, I'm going to skip the event and go listen on the sidewalk instead. And this young queer woman sat down and said, hey, you're from San Francisco. Here, gay people are shot. We just had someone killed 3 weeks ago. Like, it's really not cool to be gay in Slovakia. And I'm like, okay. And she goes, and there's a trans march on Saturday. It would be meaningful to me if you came in solidarity because you are from San Francisco. I said, okay, I'll come. I'd never been to a trans march. The only trans people that I've met are the folks I've met listening on the sidewalk, truth be told.
Yeah.
And I dressed in my usual crazy style. As I get older, I dress weirder. I think I truly am a weirdo. I wear really bright hats, and I wear stripes all the time and crazy colors. And you get older, you just don't give a shit anymore. But oftentimes I'll get looked at, and I don't do it for attention.
Yeah.
And so I kind of don't want to be looked at. I'm like, actually, this is just how I like to dress.
Yeah.
And when I went to that trans march, not one person looked at me with my huge pink hat on, my black and white.
Yeah.
But it was a relief.
Yeah.
It was a relief. I'm like, oh my God, I am not reduced here.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can be as weird as I want to be with this group of people.
Yeah.
And I had this big aha of what the queer community has to offer the rest of our lives, is that it seems to me, and maybe I'm being too orthodox, so please call me out. For folks like Alok, for example, whom I love, what they're saying is we have something to teach you about freedom.
Yeah.
We have something to teach you about not reducing yourself anymore.
Yeah. 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 I feel so. I feel like in some senses, queer people's lives, the fact that this is about the gender or the sexuality, which is such an important part of your personhood that you cannot live in hiding with it, right? So you have to interface with it. So it's almost like your life or who you are forces you to break the shackles that maybe folks who fit in into mainstream society don't have to necessarily fight that fight. They can find a way of blending in and sometimes killing parts of the self to fit in. But the life of the queer or trans person doesn't give that luxury or that choice. I wouldn't call it luxury because it's not exactly a luxury for those who have to fit in, but it doesn't give them that choice. So then, in some way, how they confront with the limitations and still exist, flourish. We are also great fans of Alok, so we believe that I think they're teaching by example, and I think they have this great line that you don't need to comprehend all the time. Like you don't need to understand why I'm like this in order to just allow me to be or have compassion, right? So I feel like the removal of the comprehension from the way the problem is structured, it's useful because otherwise a lot of intellectual elitism creeps in. But oh, like I thought there was a treatment for this, or like why are you so extra, like like so then I have to sort of fit myself into your frame of what is extra and what is not for you to allow me to exist or whatever, right? So it's useful to think of it that way, that why do I need to comprehend? Why does it need to be something I understand? Because there are limits to lived experience, and there are even limits to how much you can intellectually understand the other. So maybe there will be a point when the other won't make sense in our framework, but can we just allow them to be and even have an exchange, like the learning that Alok is talking about, learning from each
You're slaying me again. Maybe we don't need to understand. And isn't that potentially why we're
other?
so abusive to people who live different lifestyles? Because we can't understand
Yeah.
and we do not like
And it
not
scares us.
understanding.
Yeah, it scares us that somebody might live such a different life, not fear us or not fear forces that clamp down on them. And maybe I think this is what I think this is something that Alok says too, that like maybe it's a reminder of what freedoms you've left in order to fit into the gender box.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I'm keen to learn more. I have more to learn. I'm just a beginner. Okay. So we met each other because you were intrigued about Sidewalk Talk, which is also
Yeah.
the other reason why I'm having you on, besides the fact that I'm like super stoked about this conversation. It's going to light me up for the rest of the day. I learn by connection. I'm not great at
Yeah.
learning from books. So
Yeah.
I will take in my bones what you said and chew on it for several days, I'm sure, because that's how I learn.
Yeah.
So thank you for teaching me today.
Yeah.
The piece that I'm curious about, and I think I already know the answer because I've been listening to you for the last 30 minutes, but why and how and could Sidewalk Talk work in India, and why in India, and why even this idea of sitting human to human in a
Yeah.
public setting?
Mm. So around 2.5-ish years ago, I switched to a psychoanalytic relational framework in my work, and it was dissed because I was from a left-leaning university, so it was dissed to no end for being sexist and homophobic as a school of thought and whatnot. And we were taught this very archaic idea of like Freud in the heyday and things like that. But I was feeling stuck with my clients as a private practitioner. So I found a supervisor who used this lens, and we started talking about the relationship. What do you feel when the client says this? Do you feel angry when they don't show up? Those are not usually the kind of questions that any other school would ask. Maybe psychoanalysis one, and then maybe we have one or two more that focus on what is the relationship like, what does it bring up in you, what does it bring up in the client. And that's when I started attuning to my clients more and asking more about our relationship or reflecting more on their lived experience in the moment. So like a here and now approach, what is difference between the there and then and the here and now, those. And I have seen a lot of movement because I shifted in that way. And then I was still worried about the elitism that I was hearing about within psychoanalysis, but then I think the universe or the world or whatever has a funny way of kind of pushing you to the direction of synthesis that you're looking for. So I found out about how Freud had this vision of free psychoanalytic clinics, And there is a beautiful article by the parapraxis people, I think, on, it's called Broke Psychoanalysis, where they took a basement of a church and they were like, let's just deliver him. We'll not charge people. Let the doctors or the therapists come in on a volunteer basis, and let's just see what happens. And so it challenged all the norms of the day about, you see the patient in a room. They were just seeing them on a bench in the open. Sometimes the nurse or the other staff would play the therapist because there would be no therapist, but everybody was trained in the approach. The case consultations, case discussions would include the patient themselves. So it's a very sort of Marx plus Freud combination. And so if that was possible, I think that was in the 1950s or 60s. So if that's possible, I think it's possible to get the meaty parts of the relational aspects of psychoanalysis and take it to the streets, because I feel like a lot of approaches that came up after that were maybe not intentionally, but therapy approaches tend to parallel what's happening in the outside world, right? So a lot of the CBT, REBT frameworks seem like they want to make people fit back into the status quo. Like, let's look at this automatic thought or belief, reduce your distress so you can go back to being a good worker in wherever you are, right? But it feels like psychoanalysis is invested in like a soul level inquiry of people, even if it disrupts people's lives. It may make them question all the systems they are part of and so on, but at a deeper level, not like a I'm preaching you what the systems are level. Like systems language is never used. Oh, this is patriarchy or this is XYZ. But the way you are with the person just ends up making them look at everything in a questioning way. So I feel like if we can bring that to the streets, and India is a very good playground for that because we are already community oriented, so street plays and drum circles and these things do very well here. People engage on the community level. There might be a maybe a difficulty digesting this kind of format, but I feel like it's way more open and warmer than, say, like countries with a more individualistic bent where everyone is supposed to sort of look at themselves, take care of themselves. And so it might just be the missing link right now, because we have a huge treatment gap at like maybe 80-90%.
Oh,
Most
wow.
people don't make it to the, like the kind of population I serve is like the minuscule 1%, right? Most people end up taking psychiatric medical help, most of the times institutionalized. And if they are lucky, they get out and they're able to resume a life. So the NGO sector is doing some good work in trying to bridge this gap. But I feel like this model might be a good addition to the clinic model. I don't think we can get rid of clinical services, but I feel like this might be something that can be in addition to that, that can be easily replicated. Peer counselors and such could be trained to hold this thing.
Mm.
So it might be something faster than just training more psychologists, training more psychiatrists, because that, given the treatment gap, that can take forever.
Mm.
So it feels like something that might be the need of the hour, and there are aspects in the culture which make it suited. It might be easily absorbed or accepted by the people.
Okay. Well, you see me smiling less. I have my own resistance to psychoanalysis. That's why I was also curious about you talking
Yeah,
about it with you. Because for me, all of my exposure to psychoanalysts have been very orthodox.
yeah,
There was a lot of rank and power stuff where the person was in power over. And I was in a psychoanalytic consult group and they didn't know how to relate. I'm like, wow, it seems like you really only know how to analyze the unconscious.
yeah, not the conch. Yeah,
I had a newborn. I had a newborn baby who was
yeah,
sick, so I missed two consult. I missed two consult groups. And they said, "Well, that was about your inner baby not wanting to come to the group." And I'm like, "No, I'm a mom to a newborn baby who's like kept me up all night. Like, really, you're gonna make this about my? This is an unconscious acting out." I'm like, "No."
yeah. There is a line where they start doing that, and it's not very different from looking into the crystal ball. It's like, let's keep it real.
But I
Yeah,
told you that just before we got on this call, I just got out of analysis. So my analyst is a Jungian analyst who was first trained as a Freudian analyst.
yeah,
So
yeah.
he got his certificate from the whatever the Freud Institute is in Madrid, and then went to Zurich and got his Jungian. And I said, why? And he said, because Jungians are just more fun to talk to.
That's true. I agree. They are. Yeah. I think Jungians are more woo woo in today's language.
They are, they
Yeah.
are, they are. But so I think you might have, because I like you so much, I think you might have opened the door, because what I do think the, you know, with our social justice culture, Freud gets shit on all the time. I certainly shit on him. My young grad school self said, Freud's a misogynist, you know.
Yeah.
And it turned out that my faculty advisor is one of the leading researchers on Freud in the US. He's passed away now, but he's like, interesting that we got paired up considering how much you hate Freud. I'm like, yeah, it is interesting. He goes, I wonder what kind of repetition compulsion that is. I'm like, But
It's so interesting because Judith Herman, the person who wrote Trauma and Recovery, I think there's a line in her book which she says that Freud was one of the first people who heard women, because he was the one who said that hysteria has emotional roots, right? It's not like the wandering.
And systemic roots, because hysteria
Yeah.
was often coming from women that were being sexually abused
Yeah.
or perpetrated against.
He was a complex person. I think he was very intuitive, but then he was scared of how much he was getting to know. And so he would step back and change things out of fear, which gave him the image of somebody who's, kind of on the side of the systems. But this is a professor in Ashoka University in Delhi, Amrita Narayan, and she talks about it that, you also need to see him in his context. He was a Jew, probably escaping prosecution in wherever he was and coming to the UK and so on and so forth. So it wasn't your typical white man. Like, of course, he still had a lot of privileges compared to women or colored people and so on and so forth. But he was still persecuted in his own way, right? So we also need to see him as a product of his times, and but somebody who was still challenging a lot back in the day. Like just listening to women for an hour, taking them seriously, that was unheard of back in the day.
There you go again, not wanting to flatten Freud. This is what I love about how you challenge me, because this happened in our phone conversation too. I tried to flatten a couple times, and in a very non-aggressive way. You don't let it happen. No, but
Yeah.
what about this, Traci? And just for me, I find that very enlivening, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I think is the hope of psychoanalysis, because in my training, it is the only theory that's relational, where we're
Yeah.
really studying what is happening here between the two of us. I had a client recently say to me, they felt like I missed them in some way. And I said, I think I did. Yeah. And they said, I just want you to be better, to be perfect. And I said, oh, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? I want that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Right? And so even though I'm not psychoanalytically trained, I do feel that I've always been very interested in that moment of interaction where, you're longing for that moment when you laid in your mother's arms and it was perfect. I would like to go back there too.
Yeah.
And isn't
Don't
that
we all?
hard? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Arian said, hey, mine too, but I don't know in what comment, about Freud or someone else. I don't know. They're chatting. They're chat. I don't know. Arian is a they? Pronouns
He,
they?
him.
He, him.
He, him. Yeah.
I just want to, I'm so curious now, but I'll stop and ignore Arian because I know we're talking to you. Okay, going to ground myself because I'm getting excited again. I know we're near the end of time. So is there anything else that you want to say before I move to our sort of ritualized closing question about a wish for our listeners?
Yeah, I think, if there's anybody listening who would like to join, like especially from India or the East, especially the Indian subcontinent, who is interested, I think we could join forces. That would be nice. Like it would make it easier because I have no clue how I would go about this, like permissions or do we need to involve the government? I don't really know how things work. So I think my wish is that I, along with some other folks, can make this become like a reality. So that's the intention I'm putting out, that somebody listening gets excited and, we can make this happen.
Excellent. That's
Yeah.
cool. I'd like you to make it happen, and then I'll just come be your humble listener on the sidewalk if that's cross-culturally relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this ritual that we do, which is I'm going to step aside and I'm just a listener on the sidewalk with thousands of other listeners who've listened on the sidewalk. And I'm going to invite you to speak to our collective, all of us, either a wish or words of wisdom to all the listeners that have listened on the sidewalk as our closing sentiment.
Yeah. I think it does come down to, for me, when I sit and think about all the meaningful interactions I've had, be it clients or friends or family, I feel like it comes down to allowing ourselves to matter um, in a fuller way. Like, I think we do a self reduction before we do any reduction of the other. So, and I've recently been discovering that, oh, I think this is so me, and then I've never really discovered the other side. Oh, I'm a person who likes this brand or this food, but I never had the other food or the other brand or whatever. So I think we try to live by doing that. Like, life is complex, so heuristics take over and you start doing reductions just to move, right? But when they start costing, I think it's a nice idea to look at them and allow your full self to matter. I think that's what we do as children, right? We don't say things like, I am this zodiac sign, or I am this person's sister or son or whatever. We just lead with the name and say a new weird fact every day. That, like, if you ask a child 3 days in a row, tell me about you, they'll say three weird things. I like sunflowers, I eat eggs, or whatever, right? So I think maybe it's about bringing that creative, playful energy back so that we can expand outside of what life and its complexities have reduced us to. And I think if you can feel expansive about you, you don't feel the need to reduce the other any. Then you can also hold that, oh, their expansiveness is not threatening to me. I can survive mine, so it can probably survive theirs.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
We reduce ourselves first. So don't reduce yourself anymore, because then you can really allow the fullness of the other. You are a badass.
Thank you so much.
You know that, right?
Yes.
I love it. She's like, yes, I know that I am. That's awesome. I love that you just said that. All right. So this concludes our live stream, but I want to say for the podcast recording, you're going to be able to find a whole bunch more about Sadaf and 𝗪𝗪𝗰𝗄, which is a new word. Is that Hindi?
Urdu.
Urdu. It's an Urdu word that means a conversation between lovers, I think is what you said, or friends, an informal conversation between friends. I think that's what the name of your listening project's probably going to have to be, because that just sounds so wonderful. And you can find more about Sadaf and her clinic in the show notes. And thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Great. Thank you.
So I'm going to click end now.